Welcome to Virginia Focus. I'm Rebecca Hughes of the Virginia News Network. April is National Stress Awareness Month, and what better time to talk to a neurologist who can explain how stress literally hurts. Between work and family pressure, financial burdens, constant social media exposure, political strife, and more, some surveys find as many as 62% of people experience stress weekly. Neurologist Dr. Ella Akkerman with the Virginia Spine Institute breaks it all down for us. Welcome to the show, Dr. Akkerman. I am so glad you could talk to us about stress and how it affects us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start out by talking about the fact that you are a neurologist. And if anybody's unclear what that means, why don't you kind of give us a synopsis of what you do?
Absolutely. So neurologists diagnose and treat disorders of central and peripheral nervous system, which sounds very vague, right? So our central nervous system is our brain and our spinal cord, and our peripheral nervous system are all the nerves that come out from the spinal cord and brain and then go to our muscles. So neurologists often also treat disease of a muscle as well.
Okay. So today we're talking about the recent survey was showing how people are experiencing a lot of stress and that stress can literally cause pain in the body. Why don't you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So I tell my patients, brain is our most sensitive organ, right? That's what feels whatever is going on inside and outside of our world. And as a result, it transmits signals to the rest of our body to dictate what our body should feel like and how it should behave. It's a mastermind, no pun intended. So, yeah. So when we're under chronic stress, we experience negative emotions, and those negative emotions are sensed by a structure called amygdala in our brain, which talks directly to another structure called hypothalamus, which is a chemical plant of the brain and the body. That's what starts the chemical processes and chemical balance in our bodies. It starts in hypothalamus, and it sends chemical signals to the rest of our brain and to the body to produce either happy chemicals or unhappy chemicals. And that's where the cascade starts. And that's where the pain starts. If the hypothalamus sends one signal, the serotonin, which is a happy chemical, goes up. We feel happy. We are relaxed. Our endorphins get released, which are natural chemicals in the body that actually decrease pain, and we feel wonderful. But if we are unhappy, amygdala talks to hypothalamus, it sends signals, serotonin goes down, stress hormones get released out of our adrenal glands in the body, and there's a fight or flight response. We get tense, we get um, our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up, our sleep quality drops, and we start sensing pain much quicker. Our pain threshold goes down. And that leads to basically a cycle of pain and stress, which eventually outstretches our nervous system and can lead to burnout.
Wow, that's a
Yeah.
lot to take in. So the cortisol that we hear about all the time, that's the stress
Hmm.
hormone you were talking about that comes from the adrenal gland?
Correct. It's a downstream signal that starts in our brain.
Okay.
In our brain. Yeah. Yeah.
So, what kind of things have you done to learn all this? I mean, do you put people, in a machine and scan their brain and then stress them out? Like, how do we learn all of this?
Well, it starts in neuroscience, right? It starts in bench research, right? How did neuroscientists find out all these things about the brain we know today? How did we learn all these things about the body we know today? It started decades, centuries ago with people going and dissecting animals, cadavers, and just cutting the brains and doing chemical experiments to figure out what leads to what goes where. But thankfully, in today's world, we have technology like functional MRIs, for example, which can tune in into specific molecules that you can trace and how those molecules get released and when, under which circumstances. So it's much less invasive these days, thankfully, and much less labor intensive in many ways. But in many ways, some people still do, basic bench research to continue figuring this stuff out.
Okay. All right. That's it. That makes sense to me. Um,
Okay, good.
so, how do things like maybe mental health struggles, bipolar or schizophrenia, or even things like ADHD and autism, how do those factor in when we're talking about stress and how stress can actually affect the body?
Well, so there is such idea as homeostasis, which is a fancy term for a balance, right? There is a balance of everything in the body. It's a chemical balance, it's a physiological balance, it's an emotional balance, right? And so when we start having any kind of illness, whether it's a mental illness, whether it's a physical illness, we disrupt that balance, right? And so right away, that puts stress on our bodies. Whenever our bodies are or minds are out of balance. And so all the illnesses you mentioned, they are mental either disabilities or illnesses, which certainly do disrupt the balance and naturally can lead to stress. And there's the cascade that I mentioned earlier that, when you're under chronic stress, you're more susceptible to having more pain. So as a result, they can be comorbidities, as we call them in medicine, or conditions that basically are found alongside with other conditions. Um, and so, yes, people with mental illness or any chronic illness have a greater chance of developing pain.
Okay, so it does increase the likelihood of them feeling that physical pain if, like you said, if things are unbalanced. And you said that that could be physical as well, right? So, like if you have diabetes, then that also raises it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Anything, any chronic illness that can, like I explained, any chronic illness puts the stress on the body. Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
so let me ask you this. Clearly, you're the specialist of the brain, and I love that you have that understanding that it all works together. Unfortunately, in our modern medicine, that's not always the case. Sometimes people will specialize in something and, they'll just treat the symptoms of that thing, whereas maybe, like you said, it may have something to do with other things going on in the body that if you treated that, it would solve the problem instead of just being on medication forever. Is there any kind of research being done from that perspective of the body as a whole? And as patients, how do we navigate the healthcare system with that thought in mind?
Oh, you are so right. You're so right. So in ideal world, right, we would have one large system of healthcare that doesn't just say, oh, we're going to take of the person as a whole, but they actually do that very effectively. But in real world, it's hard. I think when Obamacare started, that was the idea, right? Let's create these accountable care organizations because by doing that, you kind of will pay attention to multiple systems of the person's body, and then all doctors will be accountable for taking care of the patient as a whole, not just their piece of what they're doing, right? Um, so our healthcare system tried to help us as physicians work together as a team. Kaiser Permanente, where I used to work before, but now I work for VSI. But their model of care was to, take of the patient as a whole, and still is. And then the ACOs tried to model it. And I continue modeling it, and I joined Kaiser, but it's not because, um, you know, I wanted to be there forever, but it's just because I saw that they were doing what I naturally felt needed to be done, taking of the patient as a whole. But I continue to do that. Really, it's a personal choice on many levels for physicians because some physicians are more compartmentalized thinkers, and some are more global thinkers, right? People who go into fields of such as internal medicine, family medicine, primary care, they probably, as primary care physicians, are more of global thinkers, right? Because they're forced to. They have to think of all the different systems. But
Right.
then the specialists, right? Um, they tend to be more compartmentalized thinkers. And so I think that patients need to understand what each doctor does well, what their role is. That's where it starts. Education. Like, for example, I give my patients an example of cars because cars are easier to understand than human bodies. And I say, well, if you had a problem with a dent in your car, would you go to Jiffy Lube?
We are the Airline Pilots Association, and safety is at the heart of everything we do. That's why pilots train extensively as a team, helping to ensure safe travel for millions. Challenges are met with learning and improvement, reinforcing protocols and best practices. Through new technologies, industry-wide collaboration, and the dedication of those on the flight deck, we can keep safety at the forefront of the American airline industry. Learn more at trainedforlife.alpa.org.
Where you usually go to get oil changed.
Right. Right.
No, no, you wouldn't, right? Um, so you have to understand the role of each physician and their education and their expertise and their representation on your healthcare team that you build yourself as a patient to understand your resources, to understand how to use these resources to your advantage. That's where it starts. And I think that, we educate people a lot in this country on many different levels, and there's curricula for all sorts of things in high school and in college. But just as we're now developing curricula for kids to learn how to use their money more efficiently and effectively, and how to save and how to do those things, and explain to them how banking system works and everything, I think we need to start teaching our kids as young adults in their curricula how to use healthcare system effectively to their advantage.
Yeah.
Not just teach them about stress, not just teach them how to be healthy, but how to use their resources in the healthcare system in the United States of America.
I love that. I agree with that so much because you think about it, and I'm guilty of this. You start a job, you get an insurance card, right? You sign up for the
Right.
insurance, you get a card. Okay, I've moved to a new town. I need a doctor. What do? You go either to the insurance website or to the phone book, and you find
Yeah.
whoever's on your plan, and you just make an appointment. You don't talk to that doctor to learn, about them. What is their philosophy? And if they refer you to a specialist, again, you don't interview them and be like, hey, tell me about what kind of care you provide, and you just kind of go with the flow and you just do what you're told. And I guess what you're saying is, because doctors can be so different and have such different approaches, it's better to have that understanding before you actually go see them, right?
Absolutely. And then you can be more effective as your own healthcare advocate. You know, understanding your health, learning about your health, yes, but also how to use the system. I
I
think that that's very important.
I love that. In today's world, mental health is at forefront, especially for kids.
Hmm.
And a lot of times when you think mental health treatment, you think counseling, you think psychiatry. But
Hmm.
I think neuroscience should play a role in helping with mental health, and it doesn't always do that. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think that psychiatrists and neurologists and psychologists should work closer together, especially in the situations when you are dealing with a developing brain. And neurodevelopmental centers do exist, but I don't think people are as aware of them. And then again, that's exactly what I'm talking about. We as patients need to be educated about what's out there, right? And there are things called neuropsychological assessments that are done. and they're required, right, in schools for the purpose of determining which child which needs what type of curriculum approach and so on and so forth. But then sometimes it's also done outside of the school as well. And usually that's how you channel a child who is having difficulties, either in mental illness sense or behavioral difficulties or learning difficulties. That's where the process starts. Um, but you're absolutely right. That's necessary, and it does happen. We do have centers for, like I explained, neurodevelopmental difficulties, issues that can combine all of those uh, problems that need to be solved.
Yeah, and I love that you pointed that out about a developing brain because, and you can tell me because I may have my information wrong, but it's my understanding that the brain is not fully developed and created all of the synapses and connections that it's going to do until we're in our 20s, right?
Correct. Late in our 20s. Late in our 20s.
And so,
That's
like, that's the
correct.
reason children process information differently and may even have a memory of something in their childhood that's different than what the reality was, right?
Well, also it's our intelligence, how we interpret the facts and our knowledge, right? We may have interpret. It's just like reading a book. If you read a book, a novel that was a childhood novel at the age of 6, let's say, and then you reread it at 12, and then you reread it at 25, you would probably gain something different each time you read it,
That's true. That's very true.
right? And
That
it's kind of
yeah,
fun on one level it's fun, on another level it's amazing. Um, and yeah, so the same thing. The experiences we interpret them one way at age of 5, or when we're teenagers, or when we're adults. And we may still interpret them later differently when let's say, we're faced with some new experiences that made us gain a new perspective.
true. That's very true. So,
Mhm.
are we seeing an increase? I mean, obviously, our ultimate topic here is stress in the body and the effect that, physical pain that they feel. Children are also starting to encounter this, aren't they?
Absolutely. I do think that. And I don't think COVID helped, unfortunately, right? Right.
Yeah.
We really we isolated our society from each other, from the human touch, from the human interaction, in-person interaction, which so critical for normal development, right? So
Especially in those
critical.
early ages. So, the kids that were born just before and during COVID, I think, are going to have the most trouble because those are your most critical development years, especially that year from 2 years old to 3 years old. It's my understanding that's kind of the make it or break it year for most
I
people.
absolutely. The good news is kids are so resilient and they are still developing. And so unless it was a really traumatic event that they underwent during those years, um, I think we as parents, as educators, as doctors, we can um, help even now, um, you know, with what we advise parents and how we talk to the kids. We need to continue stressing importance of human interaction in our everyday life.
Yes.
We as a society, we're kind of steering away from human interaction.
Yeah, it's
Um,
crazy.
right, yeah, yeah, and like I have 2 kids, okay,
Hmm.
and um, I don't let them use screen that often. I'm a like a really that's the one thing that I try to enforce in my and it's
Yeah.
going to be tougher and tougher every year.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, but sometimes it's just small choices that make a huge difference. Small choices. We can simply stress, okay, after you've done this and this and this, only then can you have screen time.
Hmm.
But actually physically remove that ability to use a screen time, right? don't have too many TVs in the house, maybe don't subscribe to too many
Right.
subscription channels, right?
Right.
Um, but that simple rule makes a humongous difference because um, then they're forced to do something else, which will most likely require them to do some interaction with a person
Mm-hmm.
or something useful like reading a book, for
Right.
example.
Right. Or even going outside and learning how to play outside. A lot of kids, because of our society and the scary things that can happen when you're alone outside, they don't know what to do even if you took them out there, unless you're at a playground. And I can remember playing outside in the woods for most of the day. Like,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
it's really
It's
sad that we've come to that, and I know it's not any particular person's fault. Like, we can't, point a
We are the Airline Pilots Association, and safety is at the heart of everything we do. That's why pilots train extensively as a team, helping to ensure safe travel for millions. Challenges are met with learning and improvement, reinforcing protocols and best practices. Through new technologies, industry-wide collaboration, and the dedication of those on the flight deck, we can keep safety at the forefront of the American airline industry. Learn more at trainedforlife.alpa.org.
finger at that specifically, but it's just, my husband and I were just talking about this last night. We would love for the grandkids to be able to go out and just be in the woods and in a field and all those things that we did when we were younger, and be able to run and explore and dig and climb and ride your bike, and it's just not quite the world we live in anymore.
Yeah, I think that the human interaction cannot be overemphasized, and the lack of it leading to us being a more stressed out society
Yes.
and not being able to handle relationships and just everyday world. I think it cannot be overestimated.
Agreed. So let me ask you this. Does the stress cause, the outside stressor, is that what causes everything to be imbalanced in the body and then causes the pain? Or is it, I mean, obviously, I guess the pain could cause the stress that then causes more pain. How do we stop that?
How do we stop that? I think that it's very individualized approach, right?
Okay.
It starts with what kind of person you are. Are you an extrovert or an introvert?
I'm an extrovert who married an introvert and who has two introverted kids and one extroverted kid.
Well, there you go. So, how do extroverts cause stress? Deal with stress.
People.
They get it out of their system, right? They get it out. How do introverts usually handle stress? Well, they keep it in,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, and but some people don't even know. That's the worst part. Okay? So I think the first thing in anybody, if you want to be less stressed, is you want to be introspective. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to talk to yourself, even if it's not out loud. Maybe it's on paper, or maybe it's in some other form of expression, but you have to learn about who you are. Okay?
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
That's where it starts. You have to learn about who you are. And that's why some people actually do need therapy.
Right.
Because some people don't know who they are and they need a therapist to help them learn who they are.
That's
All right?
very true.
Right? That's where it starts. If you know yourself, you will find what makes you tick. You will find what it is that you need to go to at the time when you're at your lowest low. And probably once you get really smart, you will even know how to prevent yourself from getting there in the first place.
Isn't that the truth? Yep. And that takes time and experience, I guess, right? I mean, there's no
Yeah,
shortcuts.
it's true. And some of us are just naturally blessed to have had experiences in our life that made us learn a lot about ourselves. And how did that happen? Through human interaction, through talking to other people, through having life experiences. How does it happen today? Well, it doesn't. People don't interact. They sit at home. They watch TV. They themselves do not experience things
on their own. They experience things through other people. And we're very digital. So sometimes we need more therapy now than before when that has been the case.
Yeah.
If you're a city kid who has grown up in an apartment and been watching TV all your childhood and didn't go out and play sports or had much interaction in other organizations or places, well, guess what? By the time you get out in the real world and work for a company, you may end up facing stressors and difficulties and psychological issues that you never thought you could handle because, well, you were never faced with those challenges earlier in life.
Yeah. And I think that's a parenting tip too is, as parents, we want to protect our kids from discomfort and heartache and disappointment. But I think that's counterintuitive because sometimes that's the best thing for them. If we want them to grow into well-rounded people who are resilient and who can make it without falling apart, then they need to experience those negative things while they're in the safety of their parents' home.
That's right. So learning about yourself is a number one. Learn yourself. Be honest with yourself. If you don't know what you don't know and you're stressed and you don't see a solution in sight, start with therapist. Therapist will be the first stop shop, right?
Yeah.
Because if you can't do it on your own, don't try.
Right.
Don't try. I mean, you can try, but you shouldn't be hard on yourself for not being able to. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Don't be hard on yourself if you can't.
Yep. I agree.
Give yourself a break. Give yourself a break. If you don't know yourself enough, it is not your fault. It's not your fault that you don't know. It's going to be your fault if you don't admit you need to know.
Right. Right. So let me shift gears on you. We're almost running out of time, but I wanted to make sure to ask you this question. We hear a lot about inflammation in the body and in the brain and those types of things. What are some ways we can lower our inflammation?
Well, we can do it through certain behaviors that we engage in, and we can do it through also just being around happy people. So let me say it starts with the basics. What does our body need? Our body needs food, our body needs sleep, our body needs exercise, our body needs water, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I can't underestimate sexual health also, right? That's also our body's requirement.
Yeah.
So we just need to understand that we cannot just ignore one of those points. It's not going to work. So when a person comes to me stressed out and pain, headaches, migraine, I ask them all those things. I go through a list of all those topics I just mentioned, and I ask, how do you think your sleep is? How do you think your diet is? Do you exercise? Do you what's your sexual history, right? I go through the whole list, and that's where we start, okay? And most of the time, at least one of those will be off when a person is coming to see me.
Yeah.
And then we focus on that area. So exercise, right? We just talked about it earlier, produces endorphins. Okay, it's like natural painkillers.
Mm-hmm.
You need to do it, and actually, sexual activity also produces endorphins.
Right.
Good food produces endorphins.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good food. You don't want to overindulge too much.
Right.
Because right. But listening to music raises serotonin, improves pain, improves mood. Okay, deep breathing. There are walking in the park, outside somewhere, listening to the birds sing, meditation, yoga. There are so many things that we can do to lower our stress levels.
I love it.
So, yes.
You are a wealth of information. We are at the end of our time, though. Is there a website or a book or something that you would like the audience to maybe take a look at?
That's a good question. Yes, so The Art of Happiness by Dalai Lama and Calm app. These are the two resources that I think are reasonable to, consider.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I really do appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us and, answering my questions, even though they were all over the place. And hopefully we can talk again soon.
Absolutely. Rebecca, thank you so much.
I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Thanks for tuning into the show on your favorite local radio station. You can now listen to this show or past shows through the iHeart app or on iHeart.com. Just search for Virginia Focus under podcasts. I'm Rebecca Hughes with the Virginia News Network, and I'll be here next week on Virginia Focus.